your toes. Now with your left hand, reach out and grab your nose. Say yeah, do a high five with your friend. Up high, down low, too slow, let's go. Stomp your feet, jump up and down, clap your hands and turn around.
Okay, everybody, so before we start doing anything, we are going to clean our utensils and our bowls and our beaters with white vinegar. What this does is it degreases everything. Even if you just pull this out of the dishwasher, you want to wipe everything down with white vinegar. Any grease that is on your utensils, your beater whisk, your bowl, is not going to allow this meringue to get to stiff peaks. It's just going to break it down. This is the only time you don't need grease touching your meringue. When we get to the mixing part, you don't have to clean those bowls and uh, spatula and stuff because you've already gotten your stiff peaks, and we're going to end up deflating it anyway. So just make sure you do not skip this process. Other thing I did to prepare is for my egg whites. I did those the night before, the day before. I separated my egg whites and put them in a container covered with plastic wrap, poked holes in it, and let them age in the refrigerator. This also helps. So here I've added those egg whites and they're room temperature. So temp wise, you want them to be anywhere from 65 to 70 degrees. That's your room temperature. Um, so I'm going to whip this until I start seeing foamy bubbles on top, and then I'll stop. So these egg whites, it's 110 grams. You don't want to say, oh, I'm going to use eggs. I'm going to use 5 eggs because the amount of egg whites is going to be different in each egg. So it's better that you measure out your ingredients, weigh them versus just using a measuring cup or so 110 grams of egg whites, and then I added a quarter of a teaspoon of cream of tartar. This you don't have to weigh. And this is going to help form my stiff peaks. And while this is mixing, I'm going to take castor sugar. You can use granulated sugar. I'm using castor sugar because it's finer and I think it dissolves better. So 95 grams of castor sugar. And I weigh that out into a small bowl, and then I'm going to take a tablespoon and just use a scant tablespoon and add it every 30 seconds while this is mixing to give it time to incorporate before I add the next scant tablespoon. And then I'll end up speeding this video up so you don't have to watch me add all of these tablespoons of sugar. Then you're going to see me kind of scrape down the bowl because this sugar will fly to the side of the bowl and stick to it, so then you have undissolved sugar. So you want to scrape down the bowl while you're doing this to make sure that all that sugar gets incorporated into the egg whites and gets dissolved. Now, this stage, it's going to start turning into like a creamy white, cloudy looking mixture here. And at this point, this is where you can add your vanilla and color. Some recipes I saw no vanilla, some I do. I like adding vanilla, and typically I use vanilla paste for everything because I think it just enhances the flavor. But my concern is I didn't know if that would help break down my meringue. Using it before, I didn't get stiff peaks, but I don't think it was that. I think it was something else. But I just used my homemade vanilla where I put my vanilla beans in the vodka and let it sit forever. So a teaspoon of vanilla is added, And then I'm going to use gel food coloring. You want to use gel and not the liquid. So I'm going to use fuchsia, and I started out just using 1 drop, and then I didn't like the color. I thought it was too light, so I added a couple more drops just to get the color of fuchsia that I wanted. It ended up just looking pink anyways, but so we're going to speed up the video here. Drops of the gel food coloring. And I have different brands of gel food coloring just from cake decorating, so any gel food coloring works fine. You can also add the color while you're doing the macronage stirring. It's just easier for me to do it here because I'm just doing one color. But if I was doing multiple colors with this batch and kind of cutting it in half, then I would end up just coloring it as I was doing the macronage stirring. But a batch of this, so here you can see it, so there's my stiff peaks. Sometimes you hold it up, it'll droop down, it's a little too soft. Some people say that's okay. I like getting the stiff peaks. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer it to this glass bowl. You don't have to do this part. I'm only putting it in this glass bowl so you can see me stir it a lot easier than you would in that mixing bowl. But again, this batch makes about 20 macarons. I think I got 23 out of this. So I'm doing this carefully so I don't deflate it. I'm going to take my dry mixture and I'm going to put it in a third at a time and mix it. So for the dry mixture, it's 150 grams of super fine blanched almond flour and 150 grams of powdered sugar. I took After I measured those out, I put them in my food processor, pulsed them for about 15 seconds 3 times. Then I put them in my sifter and sifted it out. You're going to see some big balls of almond flour left. If you can't get those to go through the mesh by shaking, then, or using, if you use a hand crank one, I have a battery operated one. You don't want to push those through because then you run the risk of getting pieces of almond in the cookie, and you don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a third of this dry mixture, and I'm going to use my spatula and I'm going to mix it around, and it's going to start deflating, and that's what you want. This is called macronage. It's a special way of mixing this. So a third of this, I'm going to mix it around, get it to where it's kind of looking like wet sand. You want to make sure all of the dry ingredients get incorporated. Don't leave any dry ingredients behind. And the macronage stirring process is not that important at this point, but I'm just showing you what you're doing is you're going around the bowl and then coming down the middle. Go around the bowl and come down the middle. So I'm just getting the dry bits up. I have a feeling this is where I had just a couple little pieces of hard. It wasn't hard, it was just a couple lumps. It wasn't, I just saw two, so it's not big of a deal, but I was able to pick those out. So here I'm going around the bowl, cutting down the middle, around the bowl, cutting down the middle. And then, so this is the second third of the dry ingredients I've added. I'm going to make sure all of this dry ingredients gets incorporated before I add the last third. So I'm going around the bowl, down the middle. And the goal, once we're done mixing, is we're going to have a batter that's still thick, but it comes off of your spatula in a single stream and doesn't break off, and you can make a figure eight with it. So when you're making that figure eight, some of the recipes I've seen said make the figure eight, make sure that it sinks down into your batter within 10 to 15 seconds. I did that. I think my batter might have been just a little too runny, though, but my macarons didn't come up, rise as much as I wanted. They had a foot on them, but they didn't rise as much as I wanted them to. And just from reading different articles, it said, so here, before I finish, this is air bubbles that we're going to try to get out. So we're going to squish this against the side of the bowl and then do a macaronage mix, squish it on the side of the bowl. And what we're doing is we're trying to get rid of those air bubbles in there to squish them out. You don't want your macaron shell to be hollow or crack on the top. So anyways, as far as making your figure eight, from reading different articles to get them to raise better, if you're having trouble with them raising, some of them it said to, when you make your figure eight, make sure it's just not going straight into the batter. It still sits on top a little bit. So not over mixing your batter helps with the rise. Also, when you do the drying process, make sure it has a good skin on it. I don't think that was a problem. I think my batter was too thin on my last ones. So the more we mix, you notice it's getting a little thinner. And at this point, I just kind of raise it up to see if it's going to break off my spoon, and it did. It didn't just come off. See, it's streaming down, but it broke off, so it's a little too thick. So every time at this point, I do it about 10 more times and then test it again to see if I can get my figure eight. And you just scoop some up on your spatula and try to draw a figure eight with the batter that's coming down. Now, after the second round of doing this, I could make my figure eight. It wasn't really breaking. It wasn't sinking into my batter. It was breaking a little bit. I think I mixed it a little bit more after this. But you can see that figure eight stayed on there. If it sinks totally down, you've really deflated it too much, and you're probably not going to get a good rise on your macarons. So here I make my figure eight, kind of counting to myself, and it stayed on the top. It sunk a little bit, which was fine, but it didn't totally disappear in the batter. And then once I get done mixing, I'm going to get my tall cup, and I put a disposable pastry bag in. And I'm going to pour this batter into that pastry bag. At the end of the pastry bag, I have a metal tip that has a wide circle tip, and it's pretty large circle tip. And what I did is I pointed the tip up to the sky and then slid it down so that this batter wouldn't squirt out the bottom while I was filling it. Now, tip here is you can do one pastry, if you're doing multiple colors, do one pastry bag that has the metal icing tip in it, and then fill different bags with the different colors and just cut a hole in the bottom. And then when you want to change up your colors, instead of having to take that tip out, wash it, putting in a bag, fill it with a different color, all you do is slide that bag with the different color into that, squish out the previous color out of that's remaining in the tip, until you see the color you want to use come out, and then you're ready to go. And you can do that with every one, and it just makes this go a lot quicker. So I have a cookie sheet. I have macaron parchment paper that has templates on it. If you do use this, you want to flip it over so that the print side is down, because that black print will show up on your cookies. I'm taking a little bit of the batter and putting it on the corners. This is going to glue this down so that with the fan of the oven, or you piping, it doesn't move anything around that'll make your cookies uneven. You can use your pastry bag to do that, just squirt a little bit, but if your filling is a little bit, batter's a little bit loose, it ends up being a big mess. So it's a lot easier just doing it this way. And then after I get this done, I'm going to hold the pastry bag at a 90-degree angle and pipe straight down. Now those circles, the inner circle with the solid line is 1.5 inches, and that's how big you want to pipe your macarons. The outside circle is where it's going to spread to. So your cookies will all be the same size, which is nice using these. You can use a silicone mat, put this underneath it. I've tried using the silicone mat a couple times and it did not work well for me. And I've watched other videos where people have had issues with it too. So this works the best for me. And as you know, I take different tips and tricks from different videos I watch and different pieces of different recipes and create my own system that works well for me, because I don't know if you've ever tried to use somebody else's recipe and it just did not work out at all, and it's very frustrating. So just doing a lot of testing with this. This is the system that has worked well for me. So I am squirting straight down and I'm doing a little C motion. Stop piping, do a little C motion, and that supposedly gets rid of that little bump in the center. As you can see, it did not, never does for me, but I try. Um, these bumps, don't worry about them because they're going to sink into. A couple of these cookies were the ones that had 2 little lumps of dry ingredients in them. And all I did was took my scribe tool that I use for my royal icing cookies and kind of just dug the dry out, squiggle it around a little bit, and they turned out fine. When you are making these, when I said in the beginning they're finicky, sometimes when you bake them, they'll come out sideways. Sometimes they'll be hollow or they'll be cracked, and it gets very frustrating because you put a lot of work into this. Um, Sometimes it's almost better that the meringue doesn't get too sweet. That's up the cookie part. But if you get a nice stiff meringue and you let these dry appropriately, you shouldn't have that problem. So here, what I'm doing is I'm tapping the tray a couple times and going around, tap again, go around, tap again. This is bringing those air bubbles up to the surface. It's also making these spread out. And even though they didn't spread out to that dotted line on the outside totally, they will while they're drying. And you can see the little bumps on the top go into the cookies so that you don't see it. A couple of those are the ones you can take your little scribe and jiggle it, the bump, like I did there. But what I'm doing here is I'm looking for any air bubbles that might have come to the surface but didn't pop, and just squiggling them like I do with royal icing just to get them to go away. Um, that last cookie I did, that's where I felt a little bit of a dry ingredient, and here in a little bit, you're going to see me just use that scribe tool and just pop that little ball of dry ingredient out and squiggle it around. And like I said, it turned out fine. It didn't mess up the cookie at all. But once we get done with this, we're going to put it to the side. I'm going to make another tray. I think I said this batter makes, um, it ended up, I think I said 20 cookies, but what it ends up making is almost 2 dozen cookies. So I guess 40 cookies because I think there's 20 on that tray. There is, so I miscounted. So you get about, I got 23 cookies out of this batter. Probably could have eked out 24. Um, but at least 23 cookies out of this. And so if you're doing multiple colors, I would just do, one color with the 23 cookies and then make another batch with a different color instead of putting the color in the maquinage, trying to separate that out and everything. I think it'd just be easier to do a batch of one color than a batch of another color. But put those colors in different pastry bags and swap them out, so you don't have to change that tip all the time. So as far as troubleshooting, if you want, and you're going to see a picture here in a little bit, you want it to raise up and have a little foot on the bottom. They call it the foot, and that's classic macaron appearance aesthetics. You don't want it to crack on top. You don't want it to be hollow inside. So these are French macarons. I've made Italian macarons. Those are a little tougher because you have to heat the sugar and then pour it in while it's mixing and not get it on the beater where it squirts all over the bowl. I've had some success with that, but I've had better success with these French macarons. Um, so if it starts leaning to one side, you pull them out and some of them is slid over and everything. That's why you want to, glue this parchment down. So, because if the fan in the oven, you know how it'll blow it sometimes, it'll make everything shift. So these are sensitive cookies. So glue that parchment down. Go straight down 90 degrees so that it's evenly makes a disc. Popping the bubbles, getting the air bubbles out. You don't have to get all of them out, but getting a majority of them out during the mixing process while you're pounding the tray. That's going to help keep them from being hollow. Also, you don't want to pound the tray too much because you make them too flat, then they're not going to rise up well. It's another article I read. So, being too cracked, might have let them dry too much. But while I'm doing this process, I'm preheating my oven. So, two different temperatures I've seen from two different recipes. One was heat the oven to 350, and then when you put the cookies in, lower it to 325. A majority of the recipes, they were cooking at 300. I saw one at 270. Then you Google and it says, 270. It's usually anywhere from 280 to 290. They've seen success. The best thing I did, because when you open that oven, your temperature goes down. So I heated the oven to 325, opened it, put the cookies in, and then immediately lowered the oven temperature to 300. These baked perfectly. You bake them for 15 minutes. The last batch I did, and I'm going to put a picture up here at the end, I made some key lime and some lemon macarons, and I did the 350, open the oven, and then decrease the oven temperature to 325, and it said to bake for 16 minutes. So I did that, and they just got a little darker color on top. It didn't change the flavor. I just didn't like the aesthetics. They still tasted fine. This way, heating the oven to 325, and then lowering the temp worked perfect. So here I'm running my finger across the top. I want to feel skin and not drag any icing. Here I have baked them and you can see they have a foot on them. I'm testing them to see if they're done. You don't want any jiggle on the top. So if they don't move, they're done. Then you let them dry completely. Don't take them off warm. Let them not dry completely, cool completely. And you can see they pop right off and they're kind of dry on the bottom, nothing sticking. So now I'm taking the cooled cookies and I'm storing them in an airtight container until I'm ready to fill them. You can freeze these. I can't remember how long you can freeze them for, and just pull them out when you're ready to use them. After you fill them, you want to not eat them right away. Keeping them in the refrigerator for a couple days after they're filled in an airtight container really helps those flavors mesh, and the an aged macaron tastes much better than one that's eaten right away, even though they're all good. And if you mess them up and they're cracked or whatever, fill them, eat them. They're still just as tasty. So I'm going to show you a picture of the almond flour I use. It's Bob's Red Hill Superfine Almond Flour. It's blanched. And then the castor sugar that I use, I get both of these on Amazon. The almond flour I can get from my grocery store. Castor sugar, not so much, so I order that off of Amazon. And then I'm going to show you the tray of the baked cookies. This is when you get all excited and see they have a foot on them on the bottom and that they've raised up. And then here are the finished macarons. This one is vanilla bean filled and chocolate mocha filled. I just take my chocolate buttercream, add a little bit of cold coffee to it, and it just really enhances the flavor. The next macarons I'm going to show you are the ones that I baked at 350, then lowered the temp to 325. And you can see the little brown around the edges. So aesthetically, I didn't like them. Taste-wise, they tasted fine, but aesthetically, I just wasn't real pleased with them. So I think the 300-degree 325 and then lower to 300 works the best. That's it. I wish you luck on your macaron journey. Thank you for watching. Again, like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you on the next one.